Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know, when we listen to podcasts, right, we're always trying to understand the emotions behind the voices. Like we're all kind of like amateur detectives trying to decipher tone and delivery. Well, today we're going to look at this article all about Imentiv. It's this company that's basically taking that idea of understanding emotion, and taking it to a whole other level. They've created this AI API that can actually detect emotions from audio. So imagine if you could actually hear the emotion behind the words, not just what's being said, but how it's being said. That's what we're going to be looking at today.
What I find so interesting about this is that it can analyze tone and pitch and rhythm with a level of precision that really goes beyond what we can do as humans. It's almost like, think about those subtle cues we pick up on when we're talking to someone. This tech breaks those cues down even further into data points that can be analyzed. And that gives us an even deeper understanding of the speaker's emotional state.
And it's not just analyzing the way that things are said, but it's also taking into account the actual words themselves. So it's combining audio and text, which creates an even more complete picture.
And this is where things get really cool.
Uh-huh.
Imagine being able to see how emotions change throughout an entire conversation, seeing them ebb and flow. This API makes it possible. Developers can track emotions over time, and you can start to see the emotional impact of audio. Think about how useful that could be for podcasters, marketers, researchers, really anyone who wants to get a deeper understanding of audio content.
One thing that I found really interesting in the article is this feature called speaker diarization. And basically what it does is it can tell the difference between different speakers and track each of their emotions individually throughout the conversation. So it's not just like an overall picture. You get to see how each person is feeling and how their emotions are interacting.
It's like having this emotional map of the conversation. You can see when things get tense or funny, or when people are really connecting. And you can see exactly when those emotional changes happen.
And then on top of all that, if you've got a really long audio file and you don't have a lot of time to go through it all, this API also has this audio summary feature. It's like having an assistant that pulls out all the key points and the emotional highlights, so you can get the gist really quickly.
To show just how powerful this technology is, they actually used it to analyze a podcast interview with Elon Musk. This was his conversation with Lex Fridman. It was a really interesting conversation, covered a lot of complex topics.
If you were going to try to analyze that conversation the traditional way, it would take forever. You'd have to transcribe the whole thing, label each speaker, and then try to figure out the emotions just from the text.
And even then,
Yeah.
you would probably miss a lot of the nuance.
Yeah.
Because so much of how we communicate emotion
Yeah.
is in our tone of voice and delivery. But with this AI, you just give it the audio, it does all the work for you, and it can identify the speakers and track their emotions really quickly and accurately.
And get this, when they analyzed the conversation, the dominant emotion was neutral, which kind of makes sense given what they were talking about. But then when they looked at the text analysis, it showed all these subtle emotions, like curiosity and admiration and realization, in how Elon Musk was speaking.
That just shows you that there's so much more to emotion than just what's on the surface. There are all these subtle layers that we might not even be aware of.
Which makes me wonder, what else are we missing when we analyze audio the traditional way?
This tech has the potential to completely change how we understand audio. Think about it. What if we could apply this level of analysis to any conversation, podcasts, interviews, customer service calls, focus groups?
So we've talked about the technology and some of the features and how it works. But I'm curious, how does someone actually use this API? Like if you're a developer, what do you actually have to do to get started with it?
Well, the article actually walks through how to use the API, step by step. For developers, you start by going to their API page and signing in. Then you need to authorize access using your API key, kind of like a password that says you're allowed to use it.
So once you're in and authorized, is there like a big red button that says Analyze Emotions?
Well, not exactly.
Yeah.
But it is pretty simple. You just take your audio data
Yeah.
and you feed it into the API. The AI does the rest. It's like saying, hey, here's some audio. Tell me what emotions you hear.
So you're basically sending your audio on a mission to gather emotional intel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the information you get back is super valuable. You'll see all the different emotions that were detected, how strong they were, who was feeling them, and how the emotions changed over time.
That's wild. It's like having an X-ray. But for emotions, I can definitely see how this could be huge for people working with audio. But it also makes me think about, the potential for misuse. What if people use this tech for bad reasons?
That's a valid concern. I think it's important to remember that technology itself isn't good or bad. It's how we use it. This API is a really powerful tool, And like any powerful tool, it needs to be used responsibly and ethically.
So what are some ways that we can make sure that this technology is being used ethically?
Well, I think transparency is really important. People need to know that their audio is being analyzed, and they should be able to opt out if they want to. It's also important to be aware of potential biases in the algorithms and to make sure that the analysis is fair and accurate.
So it sounds like it's a two-way street. Developers need to be responsible and users need to be informed.
Exactly. Open communication is essential. We need to work together to make sure that this technology is being used for good.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The technology, the features, how it works, ethical considerations, but now I'm curious to look ahead. Where do you see this going in the future? What kind of advancements do you think we'll see?
That's a great question.
And it's a really exciting field.
I think one area where we'll see a lot of progress is in personalization. Right now, the API can identify a set of basic emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, fear, things like that.
Right.
But imagine if it could go beyond that and learn to recognize more subtle emotions, emotions that are unique to a person or a culture.
So instead of just saying someone's angry, it could tell you if they're feeling frustrated or irritated.
Exactly. Or even things like nostalgia, longing, sarcasm. As the technology gets better, it'll get better at understanding the nuances of human emotion.
That's amazing. What about applications? Besides podcasts and market research, where else do you see this being used?
I think it's going to be integrated into all sorts of things.
Like what?
Like imagine AI tutors that can adjust how they teach based on how the student is feeling. Or virtual therapists that can provide more personalized support because they can pick up on those subtle cues.
That's a really interesting idea. I could also see it being used in entertainment, like video games or interactive stories that respond to the player's emotions.
The possibilities are endless.
It's crazy to think about. We're only just starting to scratch the surface of what we can do with this technology.
Exactly.
This has been such an interesting conversation.
Yes.
You've given us so much to think about. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to the listener. We've spent all this time talking about the tech and stuff, but I think it's time to think about what this all means for our listeners. What does it mean for you to have this tech out in the world? This ability to, like, analyze emotions from audio?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it?
Like, how could this change the way you interact with the world?
I mean, think about it. All the conversations you have, the podcast you listen to, meetings you go to.
Yeah.
What if you could understand all the emotions underneath those interactions?
It's like auto. You'd have the superpower. You could see emotions that other people can't.
Right. But like with any superpower comes responsibility.
Exactly. So how do we make sure that this tech is used for good, not just by like developers and companies, but by all of us?
Well, for starters, I think it's important to be aware. The more you know about this tech, how it works, the better you'll be able to navigate it.
Right. Like ask yourself, how is this tech being used in the things I use every day? Am I okay with how my emotional data is being used?
Yeah. It's about being a conscious consumer.
For sure. But that's just the start, right? What else can we do?
Talk to people about it. Your friends, your family, your coworkers. Share what you've learned. The more we talk about this stuff, the better chance we have of making sure it's used in a way that benefits everyone.
Yeah. It's like a shared responsibility.
Exactly.
So here's a question for you to think about. What if we could all see the emotional landscape of our interactions? Would we be more empathetic? Would it help us understand each other better?
Those are good questions.
I don't know the answers, but I think they're worth thinking about.
Definitely.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole world of emotional AI.
Yeah, there's a lot more to explore here.
For sure. But for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.